My name is Janine Hirt. I'm the Ecosystem Director at Innovate Finance. So Rupert, thank you so much for inviting us to be here today. I'm really excited to have three of our outstanding fintech startups here to talk to you a little bit about what they do. But I know Rupert has asked me to speak really about three key areas today. The first is what we're seeing in terms of fintech investment. The second is around sandboxes, this idea of both regulatory and industry sandboxes. And the third is the appetite that we're seeing from institutions with regards to collaborating with the fintech ecosystem. So just before I start, I think I have 10 minutes, but just to give you a quick background of who Innovate Finance is. So we are really the UK-based industry body for global fintech. We launched about just under 3 years ago now off the back of a government consultation. So we were really David Cameron's policy unit's brainchild. And we were brought together and created to bring together the entire fintech ecosystem. And when I say fintech ecosystem, I mean really four parts of that community. So the first is, of course, the startups, the momentum plays, the fintechs. The second is the incumbent financial services players, so the legacy players, your Goldmans, your Citis, et cetera. The third, and potentially one of the most important pieces in that, is the regulators. And then the fourth is the capital, so the VCs, the investors, angel investors, et cetera. So we have around 300 members. They range from very small startups across all verticals, from pre-seed through to Series B, C, D, and so on. We also bring in the financial incumbents. So again, your Barclays, Santander, your Goldman Sachs, they're all members of Innovate Finance. And we try to really promote the collaborative effort between the startup community and the institutional community, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. In terms of what we're seeing in the landscape, so last year in 2016, fintech investment increased by about 10.9% to $17.4 billion. At the front of that, that's over, I should also add, that's over about 1,400 deals. At the front of that, as you can imagine, is China with about 7.7 billion investments. That is led by Alipay, which is the largest fintech deal that we've seen. Followed closely behind China is the United States at about 6.2 billion. The leading deal in the United States in 2016 was actually an insurtech named Oscar. And then third place is the United Kingdom at about 783 million. Now that is a small drop from what we've seen the year before, about a 33% drop. Some people relate that to Brexit, but actually, after the referendum, we saw about 9 of the top 20 deals in the UK close. So we really feel there's still quite a bit of momentum in the UK, and we do have a leadership position. If you look across the rest of Europe, following behind the UK, you see Ireland at around 524 million, followed by Germany at 384 million. So those are really the hubs that tend to stand out. Focusing back on the United Kingdom, the areas that have the biggest amount of investment, or that had the biggest amount in 2016, were first off alternative lending and financing at about 24%, followed by challenger banks at 20%, and then wealth management at 10%, and money transfer and FX at 10% as well. So those four categories are where we see a lot of movement: alternative lending, challenger banks, wealth management, and money transfers. In terms of trends that we're seeing for 2017 in particular, I think RegTech is a huge one. We're also seeing a lot of movement around InsurTech, things like identity within RegTech as well. So we've got some great members here to talk about that today. So moving on briefly from the investment, because I'm conscious of time and I want to speak with you about 2 more topics. So on sandboxes, some of you may have heard about this term, the sandbox, before. So one of the reasons that we think the UK is so strong in fintech is because we have one of the most proactive regulators in the world in the form of the FCA. So we have Project Innovate. There are a number of initiatives that they've taken to ensure that innovation happens, to ensure that competition happens within the United Kingdom. Some of you may have heard of something called a regulatory sandbox, which is an initiative launched by the UK about a year and a half ago now, which is essentially creating a safe space where you can trial new technologies, new tools outside of the production landscape. And it's really just creating this safe environment. So they're now on their second cohort. It's been quite a success. We've seen about 16 districts around the world, so other global cities, now actually copying that format of having a regulatory sandbox. So are either in creating a sandbox at the moment or have already created one off the back of the FCA's initiative as well. Off of that regulatory sandbox, the FCA also suggested that industry create its own sandbox. So this is separate from the regulators, but it's again a safe space where potentially institutions and startups can come together to look at some of the wicked problems of industry. And Innovate Finance was chosen by the FCA to lead the consultation process for the industry-wide sandbox. We've just finished that consultation process, looking at the appetite for such a sandbox and also the feasibility of a sandbox and what that sandbox could look like. So happy, there were quite positive responses. I'm happy to share with you the report as well. And I know Richard will also talk a little bit more about the sandbox in greater depth as well. So I think just finally, before I pass it on to our members, the one message I would like to really leave you with is that the conversation around fintech over the past few years has very much moved from one of disruption towards one around collaboration. So this idea of industry actually coming together, the startups and the institutions coming together to create a much more inclusive and democratic financial services space as a whole. We're seeing this in a number of ways, and I actually will let the three startups talk about their experience in terms of working with the incumbent institutions, but just to give you a brief idea of what we've seen from the institutional side. And when I say institutions, I mean your big FS players, so the big banks that I mentioned, particularly both here in the United Kingdom, but also on a global basis, so SocGen, SNS Bank in the United States, JP Morgan, etc. We've seen that on the whole, institutions tend to spend at least $1 billion over a 2 to 3 year innovation program. And that program can take a number of different formats. So everyone is still really working out their strategy. What is the best way of engaging with the fintech community? What is the best way of bringing on board these new technologies? But we have seen around 7 or so themes that keep popping up as key ways for these institutions to work with the startup community. And I'll just run through very briefly a few of them. The first one is the corporate venture capital arm. So a large institution will run a corporate venture fund. Some of you may have heard of Santander Innoventures or Citi Ventures or Commerce Ventures, for example, where their success is rated on their ROI. It is usually a smaller fund, so in the realm of around 100 million to 200 million, but it's still a great way for them to really engage with the community and understand what is out there. On the flip side of that, some institutions have a strategic investments team. These, of course, are larger, and the success of the investment is based not only on the ROI, but also on the strategic importance and the strategic win it brings for the institution itself, but also for the institution's customers. So a good example of those includes Goldman Sachs. They have around a 25-person strong investment team. Also Bank of America, JP Morgan are also quite key in that space. We also see a lot of institutions developing in-house innovation teams or having large teams of scouts to go out and understand the technology and bring it on board as well. So Lloyd's, for example, is very active, and RBS has a very strong team of scouts. Accelerators and labs are another example that we're seeing. Most of you have probably heard about Barclays Techstars. So it can be a joint collaboration, or it can be an internal accelerator, such as Lloyd's has, for example. We have also seen a number of institutions delve into this idea of holding challenges, either local or on a global basis, or hackathons. So NTT Data has a global challenge in 11 cities around the world, across America, Latin America, Europe, and Asia. They hosted one earlier this year in London, which we supported them on. BBVA as well has global challenges, and we're working with them in the autumn to help them host their London one in addition to that. We also see institutions engaging in consortia, so things like R3, looking at the use of blockchain and how that can be entailed, and also things like M&A. So as an example, BBVA and Atom Bank or Simple last year as well. And then finally, what we see quite often and what we love to talk about are the mutually beneficial partnerships and collaborations with the startup community. So some of you may know last year, JP Morgan and OnDeck, which is a SME lender, created a partnership where they're working together to give greater access to SMEs. Similarly, Santander this year worked with Ripple to look at the blockchain, the use of the distributed ledger technology in payments in Spain. I think they're widening that out as well. So just to give you an idea, we're really seeing the conversation moving very much in towards one about collaboration.